Hello, my name's Toby Mills from Noise Productions. Today I'm going to be demonstrating for you a software package called Virtual Video Director. Now, Virtual Video Director is a tool that you can use to automatically switch between cameras based on audio inputs. So we'll go through the process now. What I'll do is I'll switch to the computer that's running vMix. You can also use it with TriCasters. But today we're going to go through vMix because that's what we're using in this studio. This is the Arrow FM studios based in New Zealand. So I'll switch to our vMix machine. Now the first thing to do is to install Virtual Video Director. So to do that, just open up a web browser, go to www.mp.co.nz, click on the software, and scroll down to the free download and then just run that. Now this will download and install the latest version of Virtual Video Director. I'll move it out of there so you can see me. There will be a bit of a delay though. And we can now run the application. Now the first time it runs, it will default to NDI mode. We support two types of audio interfaces. One is NDI and one is ASIO devices. So there's been some previous tools that do similar things to this, but you had to use ASIO bridge software and all sorts of nasty things like that. With this, we support ASIO directly. So that makes it a lot easier to configure your audio interface. Now if you're using ASIO, you'll need to use a dedicated ASIO interface. What we normally do in studios is we split the microphone inputs before they get to the studio desk and feed them directly into a dedicated ASIO interface, and that gives you the most flexibility. It means that it's not affected by whether the desk inputs are on or off, and it just makes it a lot simpler to configure. So in this case, in this studio, we have set up a Tascam 1608 with an audio split for every input. And when you select that interface, it'll show you all of the available inputs, and it'll show you which channels have got a signal on them at the moment. So obviously I'm on channel 1. We'll go through the various sections of Virtual Video Director. It has 3 trigger outputs. So what does that mean? It means you can do 3 different things when an audio channel is triggered, and that might be to change a vMix input, it might be to move a pan tilt camera, or it might be to change a TriCaster input. And they can be cascading, so you can add delay to each one, and we'll go through some of the scenarios where you might want to use that later on over, say, something like vMix triggers, which you could also use as well. And basically each of these drop down lists shows you what will happen to the trigger output when the audio channel is triggered. So we will configure those a bit later on. I'll go through these sections on the right here. So the first one is the AI behavior section. It controls the overall personality, if you like to think of it, of Virtual Video Director. Defaults to a 15-year-old kid, which is pretty trigger happy. You can change it to really kind of sluggish, which is in grandpa mode, and it's kind of good if you have presenters who make a lot of coughing or paper rustling noises and you don't want it to be so sensitive. In crack baby mode, it's hypersensitive, so it'll just trigger based on any sound that it hears. In professional director mode, it's kind of the best of both worlds. It won't trigger on a cough, but it will trigger after someone has started speaking a sentence, which is kind of what a professional director would do. The Realism simulator, basically the way that works is Virtual Video Director keeps track of which channels are active, which audio channels and speakers have spoken, recently, and it will randomly cut back to one of those channels even though there's no audio trigger, just for kind of an overview and feedback. So quite often if you've got a speaker who's speaking for a long period of time and you want to see what the other person who they might be speaking to is doing, just to get the nods and visual feedback, by configuring the Realism simulator you can do that. So I like to set that to sometimes, and that will just over a random period of time, if someone's speaking for a very long period of time but we know that another mic is active, we will just switch back to the other one, just to see what they're doing and keep them on their toes. The next section is the output triggers section, and this is where we configure what we're going to trigger. So you just type the IP address of the device. It defaults to the localhost address, so it assumes that you're running vMix on the same machine as Virtual Video Director. You could also make that a remote IP address, and then it will change it remotely. You can either have vMix fade, vMix active input changes, or vMix cut. Now there's a couple of reasons why you might want to use one or the other. vMix fade is obviously quite nice because you get a nice smooth fade between cuts. vMix active input cut doesn't fire any vMix triggers, so it's quite handy if you don't want to fire the triggers attached to a vMix channel, whereas vMix cut does fire triggers. So that is something that the previous tool that was around couldn't do, and it was a real pain because it uses the active input change, so it didn't fire off any vMix triggers, which was a real pain. It's actually what prompted me to build this tool in the first place. And then we have delay, so we can have the trigger fire after a certain amount of delay, and in this case I want that to happen instantly. Now you can configure multiple triggers. We've got 3 available. You could configure a pan tilt camera, or a TriCaster, so it could actually do 2 things in parallel. And if we just change, we've actually got a PTZ camera here, so we'll configure that up, and I'll just type in the address of the PTZ camera, and then you could have that fire after a couple of seconds or whatever you want. I'm going to fire that instantly as well. And then we'll actually configure another one as well. So what I've got in this studio is I've got one fixed camera in each position, and then we've got a PTZ camera as well. So what that can allow me to do is instantly cut to the fixed position camera when an audio input is detected, instantly send the PTZ camera to the new position, and then after an amount of time we could fade to that PTZ camera in vMix after it's moved to that position, and we could set that to like 7 or 8 seconds, and then we know that the PTZ camera will be there, and then we can just do a slow crossfade to that other camera. So as you can imagine, if you had a couple of PTZ cameras, you could actually do an unlimited number of camera positions just by switching to a camera, moving the other camera, and then fading to the other camera, the second camera once it's moved to position, and you could just bounce back and forward like that. So that's very powerful. If you have a TriCaster and you've got an administrator user account on it, you can just type the username and password there, and it'll authenticate. The minimum number duration before changing, that just stops it from bouncing backwards and forwards between camera positions too quickly, which can get pretty ugly. So I like to usually stay on a shot for 7 or 8 seconds, and then it doesn't make you too nauseous. Finally, in the overview camera section, this will detect the number of people talking, and if you set it to, say, 2 people talking, you can cut to an overview shot when that number of people talking is detected. So in this case, when 2 people are talking, it will switch to channel 1. You can see it'll actually show you how many people it thinks are talking at any one time. Right, so we're pretty much ready to go now. We could actually do a little demonstration. What I might do is move to one of the other camera positions, and you'll see those events firing off. So we'll focus on the vMix screen first, and then I'll switch to the output, and you can actually see what it would look like in the studio. So what I'll do is I'll move to microphone 4, and we should see the audio level come up for microphone 4, and it will change the input. Oh, I better configure some inputs here. So in this case, in vMix, microphone position 2 is actually in front of camera 3, and so is microphone position 3, and then microphone position 4 is actually in front of camera 2. These are just configured to the PTZ camera, because we're on trigger 2. We've got a PTZ camera, and we are in PTZ position 2, PTZ position 2, and then PTZ position 3. And then we want to configure the slow fades to whatever channel our PTZ camera is in. So in this case it's in channel 15. So if I change that to 15 for all 3 of those, then after 8 seconds it will fade to the PTZ camera after it's moved to position. Right, now we're all ready to go. So I'll move to microphone 4 and we'll see what happens. So here I am sitting in front of microphone 4. You can see the PTZ camera has moved to that position, and after around 8 seconds, yep, there it goes, it will fade across to this position. So I'll move to one of the other positions now. This is to camera position 2, and we'll see straight away the PTZ camera moves over here, and after 8 seconds we'll see a slow fade. There we go. Now what I'll do is I'll move back to camera position 1 and we'll see what that looks like in the output. So I will turn off our screen capture and you can see me. So this is what the viewer will see when you're using Virtual Video Director. So I move to that position, it instantly cut to the fixed camera, and then after 8 seconds it faded to the PTZ camera. So you wouldn't really use this type of scenario in a real world. I just wanted to show how you could deploy PTZ cameras. So I'll move to microphone 4 and you can see what would happen if someone spoke over there. So here I am over at microphone 4. You can see it pretty quickly detected, and now we're just waiting for the PTZ to cut in. There we go, nice slow fade, and that looks pretty good. I'll move to another position now. Here I am over here. You can see it pretty quickly detected. Move the PTZ into position and it will slow fade across in a second. There we go, beautiful. And if I move to this mic, because it's also on the same channel, it's just triggered the Realism simulator, so it's looking for my feedback, and of course there's no one there at the moment, but now it's going to come back to me here, and it will cut across to the PTZ. So that's an example of what would happen in a real situation with the Realism simulator, but there's only me in the studio at the moment, so there was no one there for it to cut back across to. Rightio, I'll go back to position 1. And when I start talking, it's going to cut back to me here. We might just cut back to vMix for a second and have a look at some of the other features of Virtual Video Director. Now, one of the very cool things about Virtual Video Director is that you don't have to worry about audio thresholds. You'll see that nowhere is there a gain, nowhere is there any threshold settings to do with audio. Now, the reason is because what we actually do is just look at the audio levels and we do a constant comparison between all the various channels. So if you're using this, so long as you're using the same microphones and they have the same kind of relative gain settings, it will all just work automatically. Now the real advantage of that is it doesn't matter whether I talk really loudly in the mic, or even if I back off and talk miles away, you'll see that that channel is still red, and it's still detecting that I'm speaking. Now what I'll actually do now is I'll stop talking, and you can see how that will affect the other channels. It'll actually think that multiple people are talking because it'll pick up the room silence. So we'll do that now. I'll just stop. It's picking up the sound of me breathing. I was hoping it would detect multiple people talking, but even just my little bit of breathing noise was too much for it. So you can see there though what it did is it brought the threshold of all the other microphones up. So it means you don't have to worry if you get suddenly get into a situation where you've got speakers who are really quiet and they're not loud enough to trigger. All it does is it just compares the relative difference between all the channels, no matter what the gain setting is, and is looking at that comparison to find out who's speaking. So it really is set and forget. Once you've set up Virtual Video Director, you shouldn't have to come back and adjust it or really do anything. It's designed to be a tool that once it's configured, you just walk away and leave it, and it will do its job for you to hopefully replace a director. Now I will take you quite quickly through the NDI sources. You can click on you can change to NDI as a trigger, and then select NDI sources, and if you scan, it will show you all of the NDI sources on the network. Now I don't actually think many of these have audio, which will make it a little bit hard to demonstrate, but I'll just pick one that might do. Yeah, it's a bit tricky to do that when you don't have all your microphones set up as NDI. But the NDI sources allows you to choose NDI sources that have audio. It doesn't pull all the video frames, so you don't have to worry about it using loads of bandwidth. It will just pull the audio, and it will do exactly the same comparison between the audio levels. You can disconnect an NDI source and it will stay in that list until you hit rescan, and it will just keep searching in the background for that NDI channel, and if it reappears it'll start using it again. So that's just a note that once you're set up, you probably don't want to rescan NDI again. Just leave it connected unless something changes. So there we go, that is Virtual Video Director. There's a couple of other features that I'll quickly go through. When you're in ASIO mode, you can change the sample rate. There's no real advantage in having a high sample rate. It's just more data to process. So I usually set it to the lowest sample rate of the interface, and it just reduces the amount of data to process. Because we're not broadcasting the audio or doing anything with it other than just literally looking at the metering levels, it makes no sense to have a high sample rate. You have a go button, so you can manually trigger any of the inputs to see what will happen. And the final column, the RS, that's just Realism Simulator. So that shows you what cameras are in the Realism Simulator pool at the moment and which ones it could switch to. So you can, if you don't want to use the Realism Simulator, you can just disable it, and then it will it won't randomly cut to any channels. It depends on your use case. So there you go, that is Virtual Video Director. I'd be really keen to get your feedback and hear how you're using it, and whether there's any other features we could add that might be useful. And certainly thank you to all those people who have been testing it and giving us feedback. It's been great, and we really look forward to expanding this tool and making it even more usable and feature filled in the future. So good luck. Don't hesitate to drop us a line if you need help setting it up, or if you have any issues. Just contact us through the website www.np.co.nz. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that. Cheers. Thanks.